I sat in that courtroom at 58 years old, a retired Navy intelligence officer with 22 years of service behind me, 4 binders of legal documents I'd prepared over 3 months stacked beside me on the defendant's table. Across the aisle, my 81-year-old father sat flanked by his polished attorney and my brother Brandon, both of them wearing the smug expressions of men who believed the outcome had already been decided. When the judge asked if I was representing myself, my father's laughter burst through the room like a gunshot. "She's too poor to hire a lawyer, Your Honor." The gallery chuckled. A few people actually nodded, agreeing with him, dismissing me in an instant. They looked at me, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun, no law degree, no expensive briefcase, and saw exactly what my father wanted them to see. Someone who didn't belong. Someone who couldn't possibly win. But when I stood and spoke my first sentence, the entire courtroom froze, not metaphorically. The kind of freeze where people stop shifting in their seats, stop whispering, stop breathing for just a second, as if someone had cut the audio from the world. Because they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that 22 years analyzing military intelligence had taught me one fundamental truth. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. Silence is strength dressed in satin. And for the first time in my 58 years on this earth, my father looked at me not with disappointment, not with dismissal, but with something closer to fear or respect. Maybe both. That moment didn't materialize from nowhere. It came after decades of being the second choice, the backup plan, the daughter who was fine, I guess, while my younger brother Brandon was the real future of the Hayes family. It came after years of being told I wasn't smart enough, dedicated enough, worthy enough to do anything that required intellect or ambition. But before I get to that frozen courtroom, I need to tell you how we arrived there, because none of it happened the way people assume. I grew up in a small Idaho town where a woman's value was measured by how well she served the men in her family. My father, Frank Hayes, was a former Army sergeant with a voice that could fill a room and hands that could crush bone in a handshake. Most of my childhood memories involve him pointing at me and laughing, not the warm, playful kind of fatherly laughter, but the dismissive kind that tells you he's already tired of the person you'll someday become. Brandon, 4 years younger, could do no wrong. When he brought home a B- in 8th grade, Dad bought him a new gaming console to celebrate the effort. When I brought home straight A's my junior year and told him I'd earned a full scholarship to the state university, he looked at me like I'd announced plans to waste everyone's time. "College money on a girl is throwing cash in the trash. You'll just get married and quit anyway. Stay home and help your mother." Brandon wanted to play baseball. Dad bought top-of-the-line equipment, drove 3 hours each way to tournaments, bragged to everyone in town about his son's athletic promise. When I wanted to join the swim team, Dad waved me off without looking up from his newspaper. "Nobody comes to watch girls swim." My mother Grace tried to shield me. She'd slip me $20 here and there, whisper that I was smarter than anyone gave me credit for, promise that someday people would see what she saw. But she couldn't stand up to Frank directly. Nobody could. He filled every room with his certainty, his volume, his absolute conviction that he knew best. By the time I graduated high school at 19, I knew 2 things with diamond clarity. If I stayed in that house, I would spend the rest of my life waiting for my father to see me. And I would rather disappear completely than keep begging for scraps of his approval. So I joined the Navy, not for patriotism, not at first. I did it because it was the only escape hatch I had that didn't require my father's signature or permission. I walked into that recruiter's office 3 days after graduation, signed the papers, and left town before Frank could manufacture some reason I needed to stay. He called it a disgrace, told everyone at the VFW that I'd abandoned the family to become a maid for Uncle Sam, said it was embarrassing to have a daughter who couldn't find a husband and had to settle for military service instead. But once I was in, once I tasted a life where discipline mattered more than last names, where hard work outweighed family politics, I discovered something extraordinary. I was good at this, really good. People listened when I spoke. Supervisors trusted me with classified work. I found out that the brain my father had dismissed as average at best could process complex information, organize patterns, and catch inconsistencies like a hawk, spotting field mice from 1,000 feet up. I built a career in Navy intelligence. Quiet, meticulous, respected work. I rose through the ranks: analyst, senior analyst, section chief, eventually fleet intelligence commander. I briefed admirals. I developed operational strategies. I intercepted threats before they materialized. And my father never cared. Whenever I came home on leave, he grunted a greeting, asked why I wasn't doing something meaningful, then spent the rest of the night bragging about Brandon's latest business scheme. Schemes that inevitably involved him borrowing money he never paid back, starting ventures that collapsed within months, blaming everyone but himself when things fell apart. Mom tried to defend me, but she passed when I was 26, and after that there was no buffer between Dad's sharp tongue and my quiet endurance. Heart attack, sudden and vicious. I was deployed in the Persian Gulf when it happened. By the time my emergency leave came through, she'd already been in the ground for 2 days. Dad just sent one email. Your mother died, funeral was yesterday, don't bother coming now. I flew back anyway. Stood at her grave alone while Dad and Brandon had dinner at the local steakhouse, celebrating that at least the hard part was over. Hard. But even after losing her, even after that, I kept sending money home. For repairs on Mom's house, the house she'd inherited from her parents, the one Dad and Brandon had moved into after she died. I thought it was the right thing to do, thought maybe it would build some bridge between us. Every time Dad called saying something needed fixing, I wired the money: the roof, the furnace, the front porch that was rotting. Over 4 years, I sent $8,200. Dad never thanked me. Brandon never acknowledged it. The repairs, I'd later discover, were never made. But I kept going, kept serving, kept imagining that one day, maybe when I made commander, maybe when I retired with honors, Dad might finally say what I'd been waiting my entire life to hear. I'm proud of you, kid. That moment never came. The year everything unraveled, I'd been retired for 2 years, living in a small apartment in Seattle, trying to figure out what the second half of my life should look like. I was 58, financially stable from careful investments during my Navy years, 3 rental properties in San Diego, a stock portfolio worth $340,000, a pension that covered my needs, not wealthy but comfortable, independent. Nobody in my family knew about any of it. I'd learned young that showing Frank Hayes you had something was the fastest way to watch him try to take it. Then one September morning, my phone rang. Aunt Denise, my mother's older sister, 76 years old, and fighting arthritis so severe she could barely hold a coffee cup. Her voice shook like autumn leaves. Ellie, honey, you need to come home right now. What happened? Your father and Brandon. They're doing something with your mother's house. I heard them talking at the diner last week. They're planning to sell it, transfer the deed to Brandon alone. I went up to the attic. Took me an hour to get up those damn stairs, and I found something. My chest tightened. Found what? Your mother's will, the real one, handwritten, dated March 14th, 2019, 8 months before she died. She left the house to both of you, Ellie, split equally. She made me and Thomas Reed witness it and sign. She said she was doing it this way because she didn't trust your father not to interfere with a lawyer. I sat down slowly. The Seattle skyline blurred outside my window. Does Dad know about the will? I don't think so. But that doesn't matter if he's already transferred the deed. Aunt Denise's breathing was labored, painful. I can't fight him, honey. I'm too old, too sick. But you can, you have to. I drove from Seattle to Idaho without stopping. 600 miles, 9 hours. My hands locked on the steering wheel, while my mind replayed every time my father had chosen Brandon over me, every time he'd laughed at my ambitions, every time he'd made me feel invisible. This wasn't about the house. It had never been about property or money. It was about my mother's last wish, about whether her voice mattered, about whether I mattered. I arrived at my father's house near midnight. The porch light was on. Through the window, I could see Dad and Brandon watching television, beer bottles on the coffee table, the picture of masculine comfort and entitlement. I knocked. Brandon answered, surprise flickering across his face before settling into annoyance. What are you doing here? I need to talk to Dad. It's late, Ellie. I know what time it is. Frank appeared behind Brandon, arms crossed. Even at 81, he stood ramrod straight, shoulders broad, jaw set in that expression I'd known my entire life, the one that said he was already bored with whatever I had to say. What do you want? I want to talk about Mom's house. Something shifted in his eyes, not guilt. Frank Hayes didn't do guilt, but calculation. The look of a man who'd been caught doing something he knew was questionable, but planned to bulldoze through anyway. What about it? You're transferring it to Brandon. That's right, it's our decision. Mom left a will. She wanted it split equally. Frank's laugh was sharp, ugly. Your mother didn't leave anything in writing. And even if she had, Brandon's the one who's been here. He's the one who took care of things. You were off playing soldier. Playing soldier. 22 years of service condensed into a child's game. I sent money, Dad, for 4 years. Every time you called, and we appreciate that. Brandon's voice dripped with false sincerity. But money isn't the same as being present, is it? I was here when Dad needed help. Where were you? I was deployed. I was serving. You were absent. Frank cut me off. And now you show up demanding things you got no right to demand. Brandon needs this house. He's got debts, obligations. You've got your Navy pension. You'll be fine. The casual dismissal in his voice, the absolute certainty that my needs, my mother's wishes, my very existence could be swept aside for Brandon's convenience, ignited something in me, not rage. Rage would have been easier. This was colder, clearer. The same clarity I felt analyzing threat reports in the Fleet Intelligence Operations Center. The recognition that there was a pattern here, a structure, a problem that could be solved if I just applied the right methodology. I'm not signing anything, I heard myself say. Frank actually grinned. You don't need to sign anything. It's already done. Then I'll contest it. With what? You can't afford a lawyer, Ellie, and you sure as hell can't fight this on your own. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath. Go back to Seattle. Forget about this. It's better for everyone. I looked at him for a long moment. Really looked. Saw the man who'd spent 58 years telling me I wasn't enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't worth fighting for. Saw Brandon behind him, smirking, already counting the money he'd get from selling Mom's house. Then I turned and walked back to my car. Frank called after me. That's right, run away, just like always. I didn't run. I drove to the nearest motel, checked in, and opened my laptop. If there was one thing 2 decades in military intelligence had taught me, it was this. Every system has vulnerabilities. Every plan has flaws. You just need to find them. I started searching Idaho probate law, estate regulations, requirements for holographic wills, transfer of property after death. By 3 in the morning, I'd filled a legal pad with notes. By sunrise, I'd printed out 87 pages of state statutes, case precedents, and procedural requirements. And I'd found something, a thread I could pull. The next morning, I drove to the county courthouse. The clerk's office didn't open until 9, so I sat in my car in the parking lot, drinking gas station coffee and reviewing my notes one more time. At 9:02, I walked in. The clerk was a woman in her early 60s named Martha Wilson. She had kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd worked in local government long enough to spot trouble before it fully materialized. Help you? I need to see all public records related to 428 Maple Drive, property deeds, tax certifications, any file documents related to estate transfer, going back 20 years. Martha studied me for a moment. That's a lot of paperwork. I have time. Something in my voice must have registered because she nodded slowly. Family matter? Yes, ma'am. I'll get what we have. She disappeared into the back. 15 minutes later, she returned with 3 file boxes. You can use the table in the corner. Let me know if you need copies. I spread the documents out, creating a timeline. Property tax records, maintenance permits, every piece of paper that touched that house in the last 2 decades. And there it was. Filed November 8th, 2019, 2 weeks after my mother's death. A voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights bearing my signature. A signature I'd never written. My hands didn't shake. They went very still, the way they always did when I identified a critical piece of intelligence. This wasn't anger. This was data, evidence, ammunition. I photographed every page of that document. Then I pulled out my authenticated Navy personnel records. Dozens of official documents with my genuine signature, notarized and certified. The differences were obvious once you knew to look. The slant, the pressure, the formation of the capital E and H. Frank had forged my signature to steal my inheritance. I could have walked away then, could have called a lawyer, filed a report, let the system handle it. But something inside me refused. This wasn't just about legal rights anymore. This was about proving that I existed, that I mattered, that my voice carried weight. I spent the next 3 weeks reading everything I could find about Idaho probate law. I watched 23 videos of actual courtroom proceedings on YouTube. I printed and highlighted every relevant statute until my fingers were stained with yellow marker ink. I asked a former Navy colleague who'd considered law school to help me parse complex legal phrasing. I created 4 binders, each one meticulously organized with color-coded tabs. Red for evidence of signature forgery, blue for Mom's holographic will and its legal validity, yellow for state statutes and case law, green for financial records showing where my money had actually gone versus what repairs were supposedly made. Every night I worked until 2 or 3 in the morning. Every time exhaustion made me want to quit, I heard my father's voice. "You can't win this. You're not smart enough." And that voice became fuel. On day 19 of preparation, I found it, the legal foundation that would make everything else possible. Idaho Code 415 to 2503, requirements for holographic wills. A will entirely in the testator's handwriting, signed and dated, was legally valid even without witnesses, though witnesses strengthened the case. Mom's will had both. It was handwritten, signed, dated, and witnessed by Aunt Denise and Thomas Reed, a respected local pharmacist. More critically, any attempt to transfer property before probate was complete was void if it conflicted with a valid will. I read that section 3 times, my heart hammering. Then I called my daughter Sophie in Portland. It was 2:15 in the morning. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Everything's right." "Are you okay?" I found it, the legal argument that makes their whole case collapse. My voice cracked slightly. "I found the way to win." Sophie was quiet for a moment. Then, "I knew you would. I never doubted you." After we hung up, I sat in the dark apartment, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Certainty, not hope. Hope was passive, wishful. This was different. This was the cold, clear knowledge that I had outworked, outprepared, and outthought everyone who'd underestimated me. The morning of the hearing, I woke at 5, put on my navy blue suit, the same one I'd worn when I received the Defense Distinguished Service Medal for my work in counterintelligence operations. Simple, professional, nothing flashy. I looked at myself in the mirror. 58 years old, gray threading through my brown hair, lines at the corners of my eyes from 2 decades of analyzing satellite imagery and signal intercepts, hands steady from a lifetime of controlled decisions. I looked like my mother. Grace had the same quiet strength, the same way of moving through the world without needing to announce her presence. "I'm doing this for you, Mom," I whispered to my reflection. "And for me. Because you deserve someone to fight for what you wanted. And I deserve to be seen." I loaded the 4 binders into my car. Each one weighed about 3 pounds. Together, they were 12 pounds of research, preparation, and absolute determination. The drive to the courthouse took 20 minutes. I arrived 30 minutes early. The building was old, built in 1923, with marble floors that echoed every footstep and tall windows that let in slanting morning light. I sat up at the defendant's table, arranged my binders in perfect alignment, placed my legal pad and 3 pens within easy reach. I'd learned in the Navy that the appearance of preparation was half the battle. It shaped how others perceived your competence before you even spoke. At 8:55, my father arrived with Brandon and their attorney, Jonathan Huxley. Huxley was everything you'd expect from a small-town lawyer who handled estates and property disputes. Tall, well-dressed, silver tie clip, expensive leather briefcase. He smiled at everyone, the practiced smile of a man accustomed to winning. Frank and Brandon took their seats at the plaintiff's table. Dad sat with his arms spread across the back of the bench, claiming space. Brandon kept adjusting his tie, trying to look like a successful businessman instead of a 54-year-old man drowning in debt. People filtered into the gallery. Maybe 15 townspeople, most of them older, probably friends of my father's or just locals curious about courthouse drama. I heard the whispers. "That's Frank Hayes' daughter? She's representing herself? Poor thing. This'll be over quick." At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff called out, and Judge Margaret Chen entered. She was 67, of Chinese descent, with short gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp. "Please be seated." She reviewed the file in front of her. "This is case number CV 2023-1947. Parties will introduce themselves for the record." Huxley stood smoothly. Your Honor, Jonathan Huxley representing plaintiffs Frank Hayes and Brandon Hayes. Frank nodded, looking satisfied. Then it was my turn. I stood, keeping my voice level and clear. Your Honor, Eleanor Hayes representing myself. The laughter hit immediately. Frank didn't even try to hide it. His voice boomed across the courtroom. She's too poor to hire a lawyer, Your Honor. We don't expect this to take long. Snickers rippled through the gallery. Someone coughed to cover a laugh. Huxley shook his head slightly, the gesture of a teacher indulging a failing student. Judge Chen didn't smile. She looked at Frank over her glasses, her voice cool and measured. Mr. Hayes, please maintain courtroom decorum. Then she nodded at me to sit. I lowered myself into the chair, and something inside me hardened. Not anger, something colder and more useful. They'd made their first mistake, underestimating their opponent. Huxley began his opening presentation with practiced confidence, his voice filling the room the way trial lawyers' voices always do when they believe they're stating the obvious. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. Frank Hayes, 81 years old, has spent his life building family and property. When his wife Grace Hayes passed away 6 years ago, he wished to ensure that the family home remained within the family. His son Brandon has lived in that community for 40 years, caring for his father in his declining years. Meanwhile, Eleanor Hayes left the family to join the military and remained absent during the most critical years of her parents' lives. I kept my expression neutral, but I noticed Judge Chen's pen pause slightly on that last sentence. Huxley continued. When Grace Hayes passed away, Eleanor didn't even attend the funeral. That was a lie. A deliberate, strategic lie designed to paint me as the negligent daughter. But I didn't react, not yet. In intelligence work, you let your opponents commit to their narrative fully before you dismantle it. Huxley lifted a document with theatrical precision. Your Honor, we have here a notarized voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights, signed by Eleanor Hayes, in which she formally waives any claim to the property at 428 Maple Drive. He placed it on the judge's bench as if it were a holy relic. Frank smiled. Brandon relaxed slightly in his chair. Judge Chen picked up the document, examining it through her reading glasses. Then she looked at me. Ms. Hayes, do you wish to respond? I stood, opened my blue binder, and spoke the sentence that changed everything. Your Honor, before I address that forged signature, I'd like to clarify something the plaintiff's attorney just said. The room went silent. Not the polite quiet of people waiting their turn to speak. The absolute silence of people who've just heard something unexpected. Judge Chen raised an eyebrow, not in surprise but in curiosity. Proceed. Attorney Huxley just presented a beautiful story about family, but beautiful stories aren't law, and today law will speak. Behind me, I heard Frank shift in his seat. Huxley blinked, his confident smile flickering. I continued, my voice steady, precise, using the same tone I'd used 1,000 times when briefing commanding officers on operational threats. Your Honor, I submit to the court the holographic will of Grace Elizabeth Hayes, written in her own hand on March 14, 2019, 8 months before her death. I approached the bench and handed Judge Chen a clear plastic sleeve containing Mom's will. The paper was slightly yellowed, the edges worn from Aunt Denise keeping it safe all these years. This will was written entirely in my mother's handwriting. It bears her signature. It's dated. And it was witnessed by 2 individuals, Denise Morrison and Thomas Reed, both of whom are alive and can testify to its authenticity. Judge Chen read slowly, carefully. Her expression didn't change, but she nodded almost imperceptibly. I pressed forward. Furthermore, Your Honor, the signature on the relinquishment of rights document does not match my authenticated signature. I handed her 3 comparison documents. My signature from official Navy records, notarized and certified, the signature on the supposed relinquishment, and a forensic signature analysis I'd commissioned from an independent expert in Boise. As you can see, there are 7 distinct differences: the slant angle, pressure points, the formation of the capital E and H, and the connective strokes between letters. The room was so quiet, I could hear someone's watch ticking 3 rows back. Frank's face had gone from confident to pale. He leaned toward Huxley, whispering urgently. Judge Chen examined the signatures with a magnifying glass she kept in her desk drawer. After what felt like an hour but was probably 90 seconds, she looked up. Ms. Hayes, this is quite compelling. Continue. Your Honor, Attorney Huxley stated that I didn't attend my mother's funeral. That's technically true, but it's also incomplete. I pulled out my phone, opened my email archive, and handed the phone to the bailiff to give to Judge Chen. This is an email from Frank Hayes, sent to me 3 days after my mother's death while I was deployed overseas. The subject line reads, "Don't come." The body of the email says, and I quote, "Your mother wouldn't want to see you. The funeral is for real family. Don't come back and embarrass everyone." I heard a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the gallery. I received this email 2 days before the funeral. I was in a classified location and couldn't get emergency leave processed in time. By the time I made it stateside, my mother had been buried for 4 days. Judge Chen read the email. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Frank stood up suddenly. "That's not Mr. Hayes." Judge Chen's voice cut like steel. "Sit down." He sat. I opened my green binder. "Your Honor, Attorney Huxley suggested I was absent from the family. Let me provide context for that absence." I laid out bank statements, highlighted and annotated. Over the past 4 years, I wired $8,200 to Frank Hayes for home repairs. March 2019, $1,500 for roof repair. July 2019, $1,200 for furnace replacement. November 2019, $2,000 for porch reconstruction, and additional amounts in 2020 through 2023 for various emergency repairs. I placed photographs next to the statements. This is Frank Hayes' new Ford F-150, purchased in March 2019, the same month I sent money for the roof. This is Brandon Hayes in Las Vegas in July 2019, posting from the Bellagio, the same month I sent furnace money. And this is the porch at 428 Maple Drive, photographed last week. No repairs were made. The wood is still rotted through. Someone in the gallery gasped, Frank's hands clenched into fists. And finally, Your Honor, regarding Brandon Hayes being portrayed as the devoted son who stayed close to family. I opened my pink binder. These are court records from 3 collection agencies and 2 civil suits filed against Brandon Hayes in the past 18 months. I read from the documents. Northern Idaho Bank, $47,000 outstanding business loan. Clearwater Investment Group, $35,000 in high-interest debt. 3 credit cards totaling $28,000. 2 civil suits seeking $17,000 in unpaid contractor fees. Total debt, $127,000. The assessed value of 428 Maple Drive is $380,000. If sold and the debt cleared, Brandon would walk away with approximately $250,000. A perfectly logical financial plan, if it were legal. Brandon shot to his feet. "You had no right to investigate me!" Judge Chen's gavel came down once, sharp and final. "Mr. Hayes, sit down immediately or I will hold you in contempt." Brandon sat, his face crimson. Judge Chen removed her glasses and looked at me directly. Not unkindly, but with something like recognition. "Ms. Hayes, I've reviewed your documentation. You've presented a more comprehensive evidentiary packet than some trained attorneys I've seen in this courtroom." A soft murmur went through the gallery, not mocking this time. Impressed, Judge Chen turned to Huxley. "Counselor, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Huxley stood slowly. The confidence had drained from his posture like water from a cracked bowl. "Your Honor, my clients acted in good faith." "Good faith doesn't supersede statutory law, Counselor." Judge Chen's voice remained even, but there was steel underneath. "We'll take a 20-minute recess while I review these documents more thoroughly." The gavel fell. People stood, shuffling toward the exits. I remained seated, hands folded on the table in front of me, breathing slowly and deeply the way I used to before briefing 4-star admirals. In the hallway, I could hear Frank and Huxley arguing in heated whispers. Brandon's voice joined in, higher-pitched, defensive. Aunt Denise appeared beside me, her walker clicking against the floor. She squeezed my shoulder with a trembling hand. "Your mother is so proud of you right now, baby girl." I looked up at her. This frail woman who'd climbed attic stairs despite agonizing arthritis just to find Mom's will and give me a fighting chance. "Thank you for calling me home." "That's what we do, honey. Women my age, we help the younger ones stand up, because Lord knows we spend enough years sitting down." Martha Wilson, the courthouse clerk, passed by my table on her way out. She set down a small paper bag. "Homemade cookies. You've got a long road ahead. Why are you helping me?" Martha smiled, sad and knowing. "Because 30 years ago I was you, fighting my husband's family for what my mother-in-law left me. Nobody helped me then, so I swore I'd help women like us whenever I could." After she left, I sat alone in the courtroom. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows, making patterns on the marble floor. Somewhere above me, Judge Chen was reviewing every word I'd written, every document I'd gathered, every argument I'd constructed alone in my Seattle apartment at 2 in the morning. I thought about my mother, about her sitting at the kitchen table 8 months before she died, carefully writing out her wishes by hand because she didn't trust my father not to interfere with a lawyer, making sure Aunt Denise and Thomas Reed witnessed it, making sure there would be proof. She'd known. Somehow she'd known this day would come, and she'd prepared for it the only way she could. I picked up my phone and texted Sophie. "We're in recess. Judge seems fair. I think we have a chance." Her response came immediately. "You don't have a chance, Mom. You already won. They just don't know it yet." I smiled for the first time all day. 20 minutes stretched into 25. Judge Chen was being thorough. Finally, the bailiff returned and called us back in. Everyone filed back to their seats. The gallery was fuller now. Word had apparently spread that something interesting was happening in courtroom B. Judge Chen returned, her expression unreadable. "I've reviewed the submitted evidence," she began. "I have several preliminary observations." "See you." The room held its breath. "First, regarding the holographic will of Grace Elizabeth Hayes, the document appears to meet all requirements under Idaho Code Section 15-2503. It is entirely in the testator's handwriting, signed, dated, and witnessed. Absent evidence of undue influence or incapacity, which has not been presented, this court recognizes it as a valid testamentary instrument." Frank made a strangled sound. "Second, regarding the alleged voluntary relinquishment of inheritance rights, there is substantial evidence suggesting the signature is not authentic. I'm ordering a formal handwriting analysis, and I'm referring the matter to the county prosecutor's office for investigation of potential document fraud." Brandon's head dropped into his hands. "Third, regarding the attempted property transfer. Under Idaho law, any transfer of estate property before probate is complete is void if it conflicts with a valid will. The transfer of 428 Maple Drive to Brandon Hayes alone is therefore void." Huxley stood desperately. "Your Honor, my clients acted with the intention." "Intention doesn't override statute, Counselor. I've already stated that." She turned to me. "Ms. Hayes, I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your preparation. You've presented this case with a level of professionalism that reflects well on you." Quiet applause started somewhere in the back of the gallery. Martha was clapping. Then Aunt Denise. Then others joined in. Not everyone, but enough to matter. Judge Chen allowed it for a moment, then raised her hand for quiet. "The court's preliminary ruling is as follows. The attempted property transfer is void. The estate of Grace Elizabeth Hayes will be probated according to her holographic will, with assets distributed equally between Eleanor Hayes and Brandon Hayes. Full proceedings will be scheduled for 60 days from today to finalize all matters." The gavel came down. I stood there, hands still folded on the table, and felt something inside me that had been clenched tight for 58 years finally loosen. Not triumph, not yet. But something quieter and more profound. Validation. The recognition that I existed, that I mattered, that my voice carried weight. Behind me, I heard Frank gathering his papers with shaking hands. Brandon was arguing with Huxley in a harsh whisper. Neither of them looked at me. I packed my 4 binders carefully, the same way I'd packed mission files after successful operations. Methodically, completely leaving nothing behind. As I walked toward the exit, Frank's voice stopped me. "Eleanor!" I turned. He stood there, looking every one of his 81 years for the first time in my memory. The bravado had crumbled. What remained was just an old man who'd badly miscalculated. "You made a fool of me." I looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd spent my entire life making me feel small, insignificant, not worth his time or attention. "No, Dad, you did that yourself." I walked out into the October afternoon. The air was crisp, the leaves golden. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Mom, did you win?" I called her instead of texting back. "Hey, sweetheart. What happened? Tell me everything." "I'll tell you over dinner. Can you drive down this weekend?" "Are you kidding? I'm leaving Portland in 20 minutes. I'll be there by 10. After we hung up, I sat on the courthouse steps and just breathed. For the first time in 3 months, I wasn't planning the next move, analyzing the next argument, preparing for the next battle. I'd stood up, I'd spoken, and the law had listened. Not because I was louder than my father, not because I had more money or better connections, but because I'd been willing to do the work, to learn what I needed to learn, to prepare when others assumed I'd crumble. Silence is not absence. Silence is choice. And now finally, I'd made a different choice. I'd chosen to speak, and the world had no choice but to hear me. The 60 days until final probate hearings moved with the strange dual quality of feeling both endless and instantaneous. I returned to Seattle, but the city felt different now. Smaller, less like home, and more like a way station. My apartment overlooked Elliott Bay, the same view I'd loved for 2 years. But now I found myself staring past the water toward the mountains, toward Idaho, toward unfinished business. Sophie drove up from Portland the weekend after the preliminary hearing. She arrived carrying Thai takeout and a bottle of wine. Her dark hair pulled back in the same practical ponytail I'd worn at her age. 28 years old, a junior architect at a sustainable design firm. Everything I'd hoped she'd become. Independent, capable, unafraid. We sat on my small balcony as ferries crossed the darkening water. Tell me everything, don't leave anything out. So I did. The forged signature, Brandon's debts, the way Frank's face had collapsed when Judge Chen recognized Mom's will as valid. Sophie listened without interrupting, her food growing cold on the plate. When I finished, she set down her wine glass with careful precision. I never knew it was that bad, with Grandpa Frank, I mean. You always just said he was difficult. I didn't want you to carry that weight. You deserve to have a childhood without understanding how little your grandfather thought of your mother. He's never even met me, not once. Her voice carried no emotion, just statement of fact. I'm 28. He's had plenty of chances. That's on him, not you. I know. She looked at me directly, her eyes fierce. But Mom, you need to understand something. When you fought for that house, when you stood up in that courtroom, you weren't just fighting for Grandma Grace's will. You were teaching me what I'm worth. You were showing me that women don't have to accept being erased. My throat tightened. That's exactly what I wanted you to learn. Good, because I've been thinking. She leaned forward. What if we turned Grandma's house into something? Not just a place to live, but something meaningful. A resource for women who need legal help, community support. You have the skills, the experience, and the story to back it up. The idea settled over me like morning light breaking through fog. Not just keeping Mom's house as a memorial, but transforming it into something living, growing, useful. That's ambitious. You just argued your own inheritance case without a law degree and one preliminary judgment. Ambitious seems like your baseline now. I laughed, surprising myself. Sophie grinned back, that mischievous expression she'd had since she was 5 years old, and convinced me to let her paint her bedroom purple. Let me think about it. First, I need to get through the final hearings. You will. No doubt in her voice, just certainty. Want to know how I know? How? Because they underestimated you once. They won't make that mistake again, which means they're already defeated. They just haven't admitted it yet. 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, a thick envelope arrived at my apartment. Return address, Office of the County Prosecutor, Madison County, Idaho. Inside was a letter informing me that they'd opened a formal investigation into potential document fraud regarding the signature on my alleged relinquishment of inheritance rights. They requested my cooperation with a forensic examiner and asked if I intended to pursue criminal charges. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at that question. Did I want my father prosecuted for forgery? The answer was complicated. I wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted the legal record to show what he'd done. But did I want an 81-year-old man in prison? I called the prosecutor's office and spoke to Detective Karen Morrison, a woman with a voice that suggested she'd heard every story and wasn't impressed by most of them. Ms. Hayes, I need to know your intentions. Forgery of legal documents is a felony. Your father could face significant consequences. I understand. Can I think about it? You have time, but the investigation proceeds either way. If we find evidence of fraud, we have an obligation to prosecute regardless of your wishes. Your cooperation just makes it easier. I'll cooperate with the investigation. I want the truth documented, but I need to consider whether I want criminal charges filed. Fair enough. We'll be in touch. After we hung up, I made coffee and stood at my window watching rain sweep across the city. What did I actually want from Frank? What would satisfy the 58 years of being dismissed, ignored, treated as less than? Prison wouldn't give me back the childhood where my achievements mattered. It wouldn't restore the funeral I missed, or the mother whose final months I wasn't permitted to share. It wouldn't make Frank suddenly understand what he'd done wrong, but it would make him face consequences, real ones, beyond embarrassment or legal defeat. The question haunted me for days. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, my phone rang with an Idaho area code I didn't recognize. Eleanor Hayes? Speaking. This is Patricia Nguyen. Judge Chen appointed me as the estate administrator for your mother's probate. I wanted to introduce myself and discuss next steps. Patricia's voice was warm, professional, with the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language and spoke it more precisely than native speakers. We talked for 40 minutes about timelines, property valuation, and division of assets. The house is appraised at $380,000, and after legal fees and estate costs, you and Brandon would each receive approximately $185,000 if the property is sold. I want to buy Brandon's share. Patricia paused. You're certain? That's a significant financial commitment. I'm certain. The house was my mother's. I want to keep it in a way that honors what she wanted. I'll draft the paperwork. You'll need to arrange financing or provide proof of funds. I can provide proof of funds? Another pause. Ms. Hayes, forgive me for asking, but your father and brother portrayed you as financially dependent. That's clearly not accurate. No, it's not. I spent 22 years in the Navy being very careful with money. Nobody in my family knew about my investments because I learned young that showing Frank Hayes you had something was the fastest way to watch him try to take it. Patricia's laugh was dry, knowing. I've been doing estate law for 30 years. Family brings out the worst in people when money's involved, or sometimes it just reveals what was always there. The final probate hearing was scheduled for early December, 8 weeks after the preliminary ruling. Judge Chen wanted to resolve everything in a single comprehensive session, rather than dragging the family through multiple appearances. I drove back to Idaho 3 days before the hearing. The landscape had shifted into winter. Bare trees, gray skies, the particular emptiness of rural America in the cold months. I checked into the same motel, a place that smelled like old carpet and industrial cleaner, but had clean sheets and reliable heat. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety exactly, but from the peculiar alertness that comes before decisive moments. I kept thinking about my mother, about the woman who'd spent her life making herself smaller so Frank could feel bigger, who'd written her will by hand because she didn't trust him enough to involve lawyers. She'd known exactly what he was, and she'd still stayed. That thought twisted something in my chest. Had she been weak? Or had she been doing what women of her generation were taught to do? Endure, accommodate, survive? I'd never know now. But I could honor her final act of autonomy, the one thing she'd done entirely for herself and her daughter, writing down what she wanted and making sure it couldn't be ignored. The morning of the hearing arrived cold and clear. I dressed in the same Navy suit, the armor of my professional identity, drove to the courthouse through streets I'd known as a teenager, past the high school where I'd earned scholarships Frank refused to let me use, past the park where Mom had taken me to talk about books and dreams and everything we couldn't discuss at home. The courthouse parking lot was half full. I recognized a few cars, Patricia's practical Honda, Martha's ancient Volvo, and Frank's truck, the same one he'd driven for 20 years, still sporting the bumper sticker that read Proud Army Veteran. Inside, the hallway outside courtroom B held more people than before. Word had spread. Small-town drama had a way of drawing an audience. Aunt Denise sat on a bench near the water fountain, her walker beside her. I sat down next to her, and she patted my hand with fingers bent from arthritis. How are you holding up, baby girl? I'm ready. How are you feeling? Old, tired, but satisfied. Your mother would be so proud of what you've done. I hope so. I know so. Grace told me once, right before she died, that you were the strong one. She said Frank would figure it out eventually, probably too late, but he'd figure it out. The courtroom doors opened. The bailiff called us in. This time, the gallery was fuller, maybe 30 people. I recognized several as women from town, some I'd known growing up. They watched me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Not hostility, something closer to curiosity or hope. Frank and Brandon entered with Huxley, who looked significantly less confident than he had 8 weeks ago. His silver tie clip was gone, replaced with something cheaper. His briefcase showed wear at the corners. They took their seats without looking at me. Judge Chen entered promptly at 10 o'clock. Everyone stood, then sat when she did. Good morning. This is the final probate hearing for the estate of Grace Elizabeth Hayes. I've reviewed all submitted documentation, forensic reports, and financial disclosures. We'll proceed with statements from both parties. Then I'll issue my final rulings. Huxley stood first, because plaintiffs always went first. Your Honor, my clients acknowledge the validity of the holographic will. We're prepared to accept a 50-50 division of estate assets between Brandon Hayes and Eleanor Hayes. Judge Chen made a note. Very well, Ms. Hayes. I stood. Your Honor, I'm prepared to purchase Brandon Hayes' share of the property at fair market value, as determined by the court-appointed appraiser. I've provided proof of funds to the estate administrator. The court acknowledges that proposal. We'll address it in final orders. Judge Chen looked at Huxley. Counselor, does your client have any objections to Ms. Hayes purchasing his inheritance share? Huxley conferred with Brandon in whispers. Brandon's face was tight, resentful, but he shook his head. No objection, Your Honor. Noted. Now regarding the matter of the forged relinquishment of rights document. Judge Chen's voice sharpened. I've received the forensic handwriting analysis from the State Crime Lab. The report conclusively determines that the signature attributed to Eleanor Hayes was not written by her. Frank stared at the table in front of him. The county prosecutor has opened a criminal investigation. Mr. Frank Hayes, you have the right to remain silent, and I advise you to consult with an attorney before making any statements regarding this matter. Huxley stood quickly. Your Honor, my client is an elderly man who made an error in judgment. An error in judgment is forgetting to file a form on time. Forging a legal signature to defraud someone of their inheritance is a felony. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Chen continued, her tone measured but inflexible. However, the question of criminal prosecution lies with the county prosecutor's office and, to some degree, with the victim of the fraud. Ms. Hayes, have you decided whether you wish to pursue criminal charges? Every eye in the room turned to me. I looked at my father, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time with clear eyes unclouded by the desperate need for his approval. He was old, diminished. The bravado that had filled every room he entered had drained away, leaving just an elderly man who'd badly miscalculated and was now facing consequences he never imagined would apply to him. Your Honor, I want the truth on record. I want the court to acknowledge that my signature was forged, that my father attempted to defraud me, but I don't want him prosecuted criminally. Frank's head jerked up, eyes wide. I want something else instead. I want him to attend counseling, family therapy, specifically addressing how he treats women. And I want him to make a public statement to this community, acknowledging what he did and apologizing for it. Judge Chen considered this. The court can't order counseling as part of a civil proceeding, but I can make a strong recommendation to the prosecutor's office that they consider alternative sentencing if charges are filed. And I can include your request in my formal findings. Thank you, Your Honor. Is there anything else you wish to add? I glanced at my notes, at the final prepared statement I'd written. Then I set them aside. Your Honor, this case has never been about money or property. It's been about recognition, about whether my mother's voice mattered, about whether I mattered. For 58 years, I was told in 1,000 different ways that I didn't, that my accomplishments weren't worth celebrating, my presence wasn't worth acknowledging, my inheritance wasn't worth protecting. My voice stayed steady, but I felt the emotion underneath it like a current beneath still water. But I learned something in 22 years of military service. I learned that silence is not weakness, that preparation matters more than volume, that you can outwork, outsmart, and outlast anyone who underestimates you. And I learned that justice doesn't require revenge. It just requires refusing to disappear. The gallery was motionless. Even Frank had stopped fidgeting. My mother wrote that will by hand because she knew she couldn't trust the system around her to protect her wishes. She made sure witnesses signed it. She gave a copy to her sister for safekeeping. She did everything a woman with limited options could do to make sure her voice would be heard after she was gone. And I'm here to make sure it was. I sat down. Judge Chen removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, a gesture I recognized as her way of composing herself. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. The court appreciates your statement. She put her glasses back on and referred to her notes. I'm ready to issue final rulings. The room tensed. First, the holographic will of Grace Elizabeth Hayes is recognized as valid and controlling. The estate will be divided equally between Eleanor Hayes and Brandon Hayes as specified in the will. Second, the attempted property transfer to Brandon Hayes alone is void and unenforceable. The property at 428 Maple Drive will be divided per the will, unless the parties reach alternative arrangements. Third, Eleanor Hayes's offer to purchase Brandon Hayes's inheritance share at appraised value is accepted, pending his agreement and completion of standard purchase procedures. Brandon nodded mutely. Fourth, regarding the forged relinquishment of rights, I am forwarding this matter to the county prosecutor, with a recommendation that they consider Ms. Hayes's preferences regarding prosecution. I am also ordering that this finding be entered into the permanent public record. Frank Hayes did knowingly and deliberately forge Eleanor Hayes's signature on a legal document with intent to defraud her of her lawful inheritance. Frank's shoulders hunched as if he'd been struck. Fifth, and finally, I want to address something that extends beyond the legal technicalities of this case. Judge Chen looked directly at Frank. Mr. Hayes, you stood in this courtroom 8 weeks ago and laughed at your daughter. You called her too poor to afford representation. You dismissed her capabilities and her rights. Frank wouldn't meet her eyes. What you fail to understand is that competence isn't measured by volume or bravado. Your daughter presented one of the most thorough professional cases I've seen in 30 years on the bench. She did it without a law degree, without professional help, with nothing but determination and intelligence. Judge Chen's voice softened slightly, though the steel remained underneath. I strongly suggest you consider what Ms. Hayes offered. Counseling to examine how you relate to the women in your life, because you've lost something far more valuable than a lawsuit today. You've lost your daughter's respect. And unlike property, that's something you may never get back. The gavel came down with quiet finality. This court is adjourned. People stood slowly, the rustle of clothing and papers filling the silence Judge Chen had left behind. I gathered my materials with mechanical precision, muscle memory from years of debriefings. Aunt Denise appeared beside me, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Oh, honey, oh, baby girl, Grace is dancing in heaven right now. I hugged her carefully, mindful of her fragile bones. Thank you for keeping the will safe. Thank you for calling me home. That's what family does, real family. Martha approached next, the courthouse clerk who'd helped me that first day. Well done doesn't even begin to cover it. She pressed something into my hand, a business card. My daughter's an attorney in Boise. If you ever want to make this official, learn the trade properly, she'd sponsor you in a heartbeat. I looked at the card surprised. I'm 58. So, she passed the bar at 53. Never too late to claim what you're capable of. As people filed out, several women I didn't know stopped to speak to me. A woman in her 40s with nervous hands. I'm fighting my ex-husband for custody. Everyone said I couldn't do it alone. You just showed me I can. A woman in her 60s. My brother's trying to put me in a home and take over my finances. I was about to give up, not anymore. Each one carried a story of being underestimated, overlooked, told they couldn't fight their own battles. I listened to all of them, and something crystallized in my mind. Sophie's suggestion about turning Mom's house into a resource center. These women needed exactly that. A place where they could learn what I'd learned, find the tools I'd found, understand that legal knowledge wasn't exclusively for lawyers. Huxley left quickly, avoiding eye contact. Brandon followed him out, shoulders hunched. Frank remained seated at the plaintiff's table, staring at nothing. I considered leaving without speaking to him. Would have been justified. Would have been easier. But something in me, the part that had spent 58 years hoping he'd see me, needed to try one last time. I walked over to his table, stood there until he looked up. His face was gray, aged beyond his 81 years. The man who dominated every room had shrunk into himself. Eleanor. My name came out hoarse. I'm not here to gloat. I know. He rubbed his face with both hands. I underestimated you. Your whole life, I underestimated you. Yes, you did. Your mother tried to tell me. She said you were the strong one, the smart one. I didn't listen. His voice broke slightly. I never listened. We stood in silence for a moment. Two people who'd spent decades on opposite sides of a wall neither of us knew how to dismantle. The judge suggested counseling, I said finally. Are you going to do it? I don't know, maybe. Would it matter to you if I did? I considered lying, offering easy comfort. But I'd spent too many years swallowing hard truths. I honestly don't know, Dad. I want to believe people can change. But I'm not going to wait around hoping anymore. I did that for 58 years. He nodded slowly. That's fair, that's more than fair. But I'll give you something, an offer, not a promise. I met his eyes directly. If you do the counseling, if you actually work on understanding what you did and why it was wrong, not just to me, but to Mom, to every woman you've dismissed, then maybe we can have a relationship. Not the one I wanted when I was 16, but something real, built on honesty instead of the pretense that none of this happened. And if I don't, then you'll have the same relationship with me you've always had, which is to say, none at all. Frank looked down at his hands, those large, rough hands that had crushed my knuckles in handshakes, patted Brandon's back in congratulations, and forged my signature to steal my inheritance. I'll think about it. That's all I can ask. I turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Sophie wants to meet you. She's your granddaughter, and she's never even seen your face. If you decide to do the work, she'll be part of that. But she comes as a package deal with me. You don't get to pick and choose which women in your life deserve respect. Sophie. He said the name carefully, like tasting something unfamiliar. She's 28? 28. She's an architect. She's brilliant. She looks like Mom. Something flickered across his face. Grief, maybe, or regret for all the years he'd refused to acknowledge her existence. I'd like to meet her, someday, if she'd let me. We'll see. First steps first. Outside the courthouse, winter sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the bare trees in harsh relief. Patricia Nguyen waited by my car, a folder under her arm. I have the purchase agreement paperwork whenever you're ready to review it. We can finalize everything within 30 days if Brandon cooperates. He will. He needs the money too badly to delay. Patricia smiled slightly. Between you and me, I've handled a lot of estates. What you did in there, standing up not just for your rights, but for your mother's voice, that's rare. Most people just fight about money. You fought for something that mattered. Money never mattered. Recognition did. Well, you got it, and then some. She handed me the folder. Look this over, sign where indicated, return it to my office. I'll handle the rest. After she left, I sat in my car with the heater running, watching people exit the courthouse. Several women who'd spoken to me earlier formed a small cluster on the steps, talking animatedly. One of them kept glancing back at the building as if seeing it differently now. My phone buzzed. Sophie. How did it go? Tell me everything. I called her instead of texting. Hey, Mom, I've been dying here. What happened? We won. Everything. Judge Chen ruled in our favor on every point. Sophie screamed so loudly I had to pull the phone away from my ear. In the background, I heard her coworkers cheering. I knew it! I knew it, Mom! You're incredible! You're my hero! You know that, right? My eyes burned with tears I hadn't let myself shed in the courtroom. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more than you know. So what happens now? You get the house? I buy Brandon's share. The house becomes mine completely. And your idea, our idea about turning it into something for other women? I think I'm going to do it. I met half a dozen women today who need exactly what I needed 8 weeks ago. Information, support, someone to tell them they're capable of fighting their own battles. Do it, Mom, seriously. Grandma's house becomes a legacy instead of just a memory. That's perfect. We talked for another 20 minutes, making plans for her to visit, discussing practicalities and dreams in equal measure. After we hung up, I started the car but didn't drive anywhere immediately. Just sat there, watching the courthouse empty, watching the winter afternoons settle over this small Idaho town, where I'd grown up feeling invisible. I wasn't invisible anymore. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Patricia to finalize paperwork. Next week, I'd return to Seattle to arrange the financial transfer and prepare to move back to Idaho permanently. Next month, I'd start clearing out Mom's house, deciding what to keep and what to transform. But today, right now, I let myself feel something I'd been too disciplined to allow during the preparation, too focused to permit during the hearings. Victory. Not the loud celebratory kind, the quiet kind that settles into your bones and changes how you stand, how you breathe, how you see yourself in mirrors. I'd fought for my mother's voice. I'd fought for my own. And the battle had shifted, not ended, but transformed into something I could finally control. The transfer of funds took 3 weeks. Brandon signed the paperwork without ceremony, his signature scrawled with the angry pressure of someone who'd gambled and lost. Patricia handled the details with professional efficiency, and by mid-January, The deed to 428 Maple Drive carried only my name. I stood in the driveway on a Thursday afternoon, the house key cold in my palm, and felt the weight of ownership settle over me like a coat I'd been reaching for my entire life. The yellow paint had faded to something closer to cream. The porch Mom used to sweep every morning sagged slightly on the left side. The rose bushes she'd planted were overgrown, wild, still alive against all odds. Sophie pulled up in her Subaru as I was unlocking the front door. "You waited for me." She climbed out with her architect's bag and a toolbox. "I thought you'd want to go in alone first." I thought about it, but this isn't just about the past anymore. It's about what we build next. We walked in together. The smell hit me first. Dust and stale air, and something underneath that was pure memory. Mom's lavender sachets, even after 6 years. The living room looked smaller than I remembered, the way childhood spaces always do. Brandon had left furniture, probably anything he couldn't sell quickly. The built-in bookshelf Frank had promised to fix for a decade still leaned slightly left. The kitchen window still had the bluebird sticker Mom loved. Sophie moved through the rooms with an architect's eye, taking measurements, photographs, making notes. "The bones are good, structure's solid. You'll need new plumbing, updated electrical, but nothing load-bearing is compromised." She ran her hand along the wall. "This could be beautiful, Mom. Really beautiful." We spent that afternoon creating inventory. In Mom's bedroom, I found the tin box Aunt Denise had mentioned, letters I'd sent from my first deployment, carefully preserved. 23 letters, their edges worn from repeated reading. In one margin, Mom had written in pencil, "My brave girl." Frank doesn't see it, but I do. I sat on the floor and cried for the first time since the hearing. Not sad tears exactly. Something more complicated. Grief mixed with relief, loss tangled with love. Sophie sat beside me, not saying anything, just present. Eventually, she handed me a tissue from her bag. "She knew, didn't she, that you were strong?" "She knew. She just couldn't protect me from him." "Maybe she did, though, in the only way she could." Sophie gestured at the house around us. "She made sure you'd have this." Made sure her voice would count when it mattered most. Over the next month, I moved my essential belongings from Seattle and set up temporary residence in one bedroom while we planned renovations. Sophie drove up every weekend, bringing architectural sketches and enthusiasm. Front room becomes a resource library, legal reference books, community resources, computers with internet access. Back bedroom converts to private consultation space. Kitchen stays a kitchen because people need neutral spaces to feel comfortable. Dining room becomes group meeting area. That's ambitious. You argued your own inheritance case without a law degree. Ambitious is kind of your brand now. We hired local contractors, deliberately choosing women-owned businesses when possible. Maria Santos and her daughter Carmen ran a small construction company that had struggled to get contracts in a town where the good old boys network still dominated. They walked through the house with professional assessment. Maria whistled low. "This is doable. 3 months if you want it done right. We'll need to bring the electrical up to code, replace some plumbing, reinforce the porch foundation. But the structure's sound." "How much?" She handed me an estimate, fair, detailed, honest. "When can you start?" "Monday if you're ready." While Maria's crew worked on infrastructure, I focused on gathering resources. I contacted legal aid organizations, collected reference materials, reached out to retired attorneys willing to volunteer consultation hours. The response surprised me. People wanted to help, wanted to be part of something that mattered. One of those volunteers was Judge Margaret Chen. She called on a Tuesday evening, her voice carrying the same measured authority it had in the courtroom. "Ms. Hayes, I heard through the courthouse grapevine about your project. I'm retiring in June. I'd like to offer pro bono consultation hours at your center, if you'd have me." "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." "Say yes. I've spent 30 years watching people struggle through the legal system without understanding their rights. What you're building addresses that. I want to be part of it." Then yes, absolutely yes. I thought yes. By March, news of the house renovation had spread through town. Women started appearing at the door, asking when we'd open, offering to help. Martha from the courthouse brought boxes of donated office supplies. Aunt Denise organized a furniture drive. Even women I didn't know contributed. A desk here, chairs there, a coffee maker still in its box. One afternoon, a woman in her early 40s knocked while I was sorting donated books. Ms. Hayes, I'm Jessica Chen, Judge Chen's daughter. I'm an attorney in Boise. I recognized the name from Martha's business card. Your mother mentioned you might visit. She did more than mention. She suggested I offer you something. Jessica set her briefcase on the table. I'd like to provide monthly pro bono clinics here. Estate law, family law, basic civil matters. Help people understand their options. That's that's incredibly generous. It's self-interested, too. I grew up watching my mother fight to be taken seriously in a profession that didn't want Asian women on the bench. What you did in that courtroom, representing yourself, winning against all expectations, that matters. It shows women they're capable of more than the world tells them they are. The center, we'd started calling it Grace's Place, opened in late April on a Saturday morning. Spring had transformed the garden Mom had planted. The rose bushes bloomed in defiant yellows and reds. New paint brightened the exterior. The porch Frank had never fixed now stood level and strong. We'd sent announcements to every woman's organization within 50 miles. I expected maybe 20 people. 87 women showed up. They filled the front room, spilled into the kitchen, clustered on the new porch. Young women and old, working class and professional. Some with children, some alone. All of them carrying stories of being dismissed, underestimated, told they couldn't fight their own battles. I stood in Mom's dining room, now converted to a meeting space, and looked at all those faces. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a counselor, I'm just a woman who got tired of being invisible. My voice carried better than I expected. 22 years of military briefings had taught me projection. My mother left me a house and a will, and my father tried to take both. I fought back the only way I could, by learning everything I needed to know and refusing to quit. Heads nodded throughout the room. That's what this place is for, not to replace lawyers. You still need professional help for serious legal matters, but to give you the tools to understand your rights, to prepare your own cases when possible, to stop feeling powerless in systems designed to intimidate you. A woman in the back raised her hand. What if we can't afford lawyers? We have volunteer attorneys offering free consultations. We have legal reference materials. We have each other, women who've been through similar situations and can offer guidance. I paused. And we have something else. We have proof that one woman in this room stood up to her father and a trained attorney and won. If I can do it, so can you. The applause started small, then built. Not polite recognition, but something deeper. Solidarity, hope, the recognition of possibility. After the opening, women lingered. They shared stories over coffee in Mom's kitchen. A 63-year-old widow fighting her stepchildren for her late husband's pension. A 30-year-old mother navigating custody battles. A 50-year-old woman whose siblings were trying to declare her incompetent to control family assets. Every story was different. Every story was the same. Women being told they didn't matter, fighting to prove they did. Sophie pulled me aside late in the afternoon, her eyes bright. Mom, look at this. Look at what you built. We built it together. No, you gave me the blueprint when you stood up in that courtroom. This, she gestured at the room full of women, is just the natural consequence. That evening, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet house alone. Straightened chairs, wiped down counters, locked doors, normal domestic tasks that felt sacred somehow, weighted with meaning. I ended up in Mom's old bedroom, now my bedroom, looking at the framed photo on the dresser. Mom in her garden, hands dirty from planting, smiling at something off camera. Probably me, 17 years old, home from school, telling her about some achievement Frank would dismiss by dinner. I hope this is what you wanted, I whispered to the photo. I hope I got it right. My phone rang, Frank's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Hello? Eleanor, it's me. I know. Silence stretched between us, heavy with 6 decades of failure and a few months of painful truth. I heard about your opening today, the center. Word travels fast in small towns. I wanted to, He stopped, started again. I wanted to tell you I've been going to counseling, like you suggested, like the judge recommended. I sat down slowly on the bed. How long? 3 months now, every Thursday. There's a therapist in Boise who specializes in family dynamics, elderly men dealing with outdated attitudes. He laughed bitterly. Turns out I'm a textbook case of generational misogyny and toxic masculinity. Who knew? How's it going? Hard, really hard. She makes me look at things I've spent my whole life not looking at. But I'm trying, Eleanor. I'm actually trying. Why? The question hung in the air. Because I'm 81 years old, and I'm going to die relatively soon. And I realized I don't want to die being the man I saw in your eyes in that courtroom. The man who laughed at his own daughter. The man who forged her signature. The man who spent her whole life making her feel worthless. His voice cracked. I can't undo any of it. Can't give you back your childhood or your mother's funeral or the 58 years I wasted. But maybe I can spend whatever time I have left being someone different, someone better. Not for you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but for me. So I can die knowing I at least tried to be the father you deserved. I closed my eyes, feeling tears track down my cheeks. That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me. Yeah, well, honesty is new for me. Still getting used to it. Despite everything, I almost smiled. I meant what I said at the courthouse. If you do the work, real work, sustained work, we can try to build something, not the relationship we should have had, but something real. I'd like that, if you're willing, when you're ready. I'm not ready yet. I know, that's fair. He paused. Your mother would be proud of you, of what you've done, what you're doing. I hope so. So, after we hung up, I sat in the growing darkness, processing. Frank was trying, actually trying. It might fail. Probably would, honestly. 81 years of ingrained behavior didn't change easily. But the attempt itself meant something. It meant I'd been heard. Sophie called an hour later. Hey, I forgot to ask, are you free next weekend? I want to bring someone to meet you. Someone? Her name's Lily. We've been dating for 6 months. It's getting serious, and she wants to see where I came from, where you fought your battle. My heart swelled. I'd love to meet her. Good, because she's incredibly impressed by you. Keeps calling you the badass grandmother. I'm not a grandmother. Not yet, but Lily and I have been talking about kids, so, maybe someday. After we said goodnight, I walked out to the porch. The evening air carried the scent of Mom's roses, their fragrance sweet and complex. Stars emerged in the darkening sky, the same stars I'd watched as a teenager when I dreamed of escape, never imagining I'd return like this. Victorious, vindicated, building something that mattered. Footsteps on the sidewalk. Martha appeared, her old Volvo parked at the curb. Saw your lights on, wanted to check in after the big day. We sat on the porch steps together, 2 women who'd fought their own battles and survived to help others. 87 women, Martha said softly. Do you know what that means? 87 women who might not have to fight alone like we did. That's the hope. It's more than hope. It's reality now. You built something that outlasts your personal victory. That's legacy. The word settled over me, weighty and satisfying. Legacy. Not just winning my case. Not just honoring Mom's will. But creating something that would help women long after I was gone. Over the following weeks, Grace's Place found its rhythm. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, Judge Chen held consultation hours. Wednesday afternoons, Jessica Chen ran legal clinics. Saturday mornings became group sessions where women shared strategies, resources, stories. I became a fixture, part librarian, part counselor, part living proof that ordinary women could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept being diminished. One Tuesday evening in May, a woman in her late 50s appeared during quiet hours. She had the exhausted look of someone who'd been fighting too long. I heard about this place, about you, about what you did. Come in, and coffee? We sat in Mom's kitchen while she told her story. 40 years married to a man who'd controlled every dollar, every decision. He died 6 months ago, and his children from a previous marriage were contesting the will, claiming she'd manipulated their elderly father. My attorney says I should settle, give them half of everything to avoid a trial. But that house, I helped pay for it. I sacrificed my career to support his. And his kids want me to just walk away from 40 years of my life. What do you want to do? Fight, but I'm terrified. I'm not smart like you. I'm not strong. I poured more coffee, thinking carefully about my response. I'm not naturally strong. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. Strength suggests some innate quality. Stubbornness is a choice. It's deciding that other people's low expectations don't define your capabilities. How do I start? Same way I did. Learn everything you can, gather evidence, document everything, build your case piece by piece, and remember, the system counts on you being too intimidated to fight back. When you refuse to be intimidated, you've already won half the battle. She left with a stack of reference books and a plan. 3 months later, she won her case. The judge ruled that the adult children had no legitimate claim, that their father's will was clear and valid. She came back to Grace's place afterward, bringing flowers. I wanted you to know. I stood up in that courtroom and I didn't back down because you showed me I could. Stories like hers multiplied. The woman fighting for custody won joint custody with a schedule that prioritized her children's needs. The widow secured her husband's pension. The woman whose siblings claimed incompetence got a court-ordered evaluation that proved their claims baseless. Not every woman won. Some cases were genuinely unwinnable. Some women discovered that fighting would cost more than surrendering, but all of them left Grace's place with something they hadn't had before: knowledge, agency, the understanding that they had rights and options. By summer, Grace's place had become something larger than I'd imagined. A reporter from the Idaho Statesman wrote a feature story. NPR picked it up for a national segment. Women from other states began emailing, asking how to replicate the model in their communities. Sophie quit her job in Portland and moved to Idaho full-time to help manage the expansion. She and Lily rented a house 2 blocks away. On Sunday mornings, we'd have brunch together in Mom's kitchen, my kitchen now, planning the week, discussing strategy, laughing at inside jokes. The family I'd chosen, built from love instead of obligation. In August, Frank called again. I wanted to let you know I've been sober for 4 months. My therapist suggested AA in addition to counseling. Turns out I was drinking to avoid thinking about what an ass I'd been. That's good, Dad, really good. I also wanted to ask, would you be willing to meet? Just for coffee, nothing heavy, just trying. I looked at the calendar. Grace's place had a light schedule next Wednesday. Wednesday at 2, the cafe on Main Street, 1 hour. I'll be there. Wednesday arrived with summer heat and the butterflies I hadn't felt since my first combat briefing. I arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early. Frank was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking smaller somehow. Old age had finally caught up with the man who'd seemed invincible when I was young. I sat down across from him. Thank you for coming. His hand shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. I know I don't deserve your time. You're right, you don't. But I'm giving it anyway because I want to see if change is possible. We talked for 90 minutes. He told me about therapy, about the homework his counselor assigned, writing letters to Mom apologizing for things he'd never apologized for while she was alive, about calling Brandon and attempting conversations that went nowhere. Your brother won't speak to me. Says I betrayed him by not fighting harder against you. He'll come around or he won't. That's his choice. I know. I'm learning about that too. That I can't control other people's responses, can only control my own actions. He smiled sadly. Would have been useful information 60 years ago. Before we left, he pulled an envelope from his jacket. I wrote you something. My therapist suggested it. You don't have to read it now or ever, but I wanted you to have it. The envelope was heavy, multiple pages inside. I tucked it into my bag. I'll read it when I'm ready. That's fair. We stood awkwardly in the parking lot. Frank extended his hand, then thought better of it and lowered it. I know we're not huggers, never have been. But I'm glad you gave me this chance. Me too. I drove back to Grace's place with the envelope on the passenger seat, its presence both heavy and hopeful. I wasn't ready to read it yet. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. Maybe when enough healing had happened that I could receive his words without the old wounds reopening. That evening, Sophie and Lily came over for dinner. We ate on the porch, the 3 of us, watching fireflies emerge as darkness fell. Lily raised her glass. To Eleanor, who taught us that justice doesn't require revenge, just refusing to disappear. Sophie clinked her glass against mine, then Lily's. To Grandma Grace, who planted roses that outlasted the man who never appreciated them. I looked at these 2 young women, building their lives with intention and courage, and felt something shift in my chest. Not healing exactly, some wounds don't heal fully, but transformation. The pain becoming something useful, generative, to all the women who came before us, I said quietly, and all the ones who'll come after. May they never have to fight as hard as we did, but may they always know they can. Later that night, alone in my room, I finally opened Frank's envelope. The letter was 12 pages, handwritten in his careful print. It started with an apology, detailed, specific, acknowledging every hurt I'd cataloged over 58 years. Then it moved into explanation, not excuse, of how he'd been raised, the damage his own father had inflicted, the cycle of diminishing women he'd perpetuated without examining. But the final pages surprised me. He wrote about watching the news coverage of Grace's place, seeing women interviewed about how the center had helped them, about realizing that his daughter had created something meaningful from the pain he'd caused. I can't undo what I did, can't give you back what I took. But I can tell you this, I was wrong about everything. You're not too poor to hire a lawyer. You're wealthy in ways I never understood. You're not weak or incapable or less than Brandon. You're stronger than both of us combined. And I'm sorry it took a courtroom and a judge and public humiliation for me to see what your mother saw all along. You were always the best of us. I just refused to look. I read the letter 3 times, cried through the second reading, felt something very close to forgiveness stir during the third. Not complete forgiveness, that might never come, but the beginning of it, the possibility of it. The next morning I texted him, I read your letter. Thank you for writing it. Let's meet again next month. His response came immediately. I'd like that. Thank you for the chance. September brought the first anniversary of Aunt Denise's phone call, the one that had started everything. She'd declined significantly over the year, arthritis worse, mobility limited to a wheelchair, but her mind remained sharp. I brought her to Grace's place on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. This is what you made possible, I told her as we sat in the front room, surrounded by legal reference books and resource materials. When you climbed those attic stairs to find Mom's will, when you called me home, this is what that phone call became. Aunt Denise's eyes filled with tears. Your mother and I used to talk about this, about how women our age had to swallow so much, had to accept that men knew best, had to smile and accommodate and disappear when convenient. She gripped my hand with her twisted fingers. We dreamed about a world where our daughters wouldn't have to, where our granddaughters could stand up and speak out and be heard. You made that dream real, baby girl. She passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later. The funeral was small, attended mostly by women from Grace's place who'd never met her, but understood what she'd done for all of us. I gave the eulogy. Denise Morrison climbed attic stairs despite agonizing pain because she believed my mother's voice mattered. She made a phone call that changed my life because she believed I was capable of fighting. And she lived to see Grace's place open because she believed women deserve spaces where their worth isn't questioned. She was quiet strength personified, and we honor her memory by being that strength for each other. After the service, Frank approached me carefully. That was beautiful. Denise deserved that recognition. She did. I wanted to ask, would you be comfortable with me meeting Sophie? I know I said I wanted to, but I didn't want to push. I looked at him. This old man who'd spent 81 years being certain, and the last 8 months learning uncertainty. Let me talk to her. If she's ready, we'll arrange something. Sophie was ready. We met the following Sunday at Grace's place. Neutral ground, comfortable territory. Frank arrived 15 minutes early, nervous energy making him fidget with his coffee cup. When Sophie walked in, Frank stood up so quickly he nearly knocked over his chair. She looked so much like Mom. Same bone structure, same way of holding herself with quiet confidence. She wore jeans and a vintage band t-shirt, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun, professional polish swapped for weekend casual. Hi, Grandpa Frank. The word grandpa visibly shook him. Sophie, it's good to finally meet you. They shook hands formally, awkwardly. I excused myself to the kitchen, giving them space while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Through the doorway, I watched them navigate unfamiliar territory. Frank showing her photos he'd brought, Mom as a young woman, me as a child, Brandon at various ages. Sophie sharing stories about her work, her relationship with Lily, her life that had unfolded entirely without him. After an hour, Sophie came into the kitchen. He's trying really hard not to be terrible. That's progress for him. I know, Mom told me everything. About the lawsuit, the forgery, all of it. She leaned against the counter. I'm not going to pretend we have some magical grandfather-granddaughter bond, but I'm willing to give him a chance. For you. And for Grandma Grace. Not for me, for yourself. Only do this if you want to. I do want to. I want to see if people can actually change, if redemption is real or just something we tell ourselves to feel better. Frank kept trying. Monthly meetings became biweekly. He started attending AA regularly, celebrated 6 months sober with a chip he showed me with pride. He wrote letters to women he'd worked with over the years, apologizing for dismissive behavior, sexual comments, the casual misogyny he'd perpetrated without thought. Some women wrote back, some didn't. He accepted both responses. By December, a full year after the final hearing, Grace's Place had helped 247 women navigate legal challenges. Not all won their cases, but all left stronger than they'd arrived. The local bar association recognized the center with an award for community service. Judge Chen accepted on our behalf, her retirement speech praising the power of grassroots legal education. Eleanor Hayes proved that justice isn't exclusively for those who can afford representation. She proved that preparation, determination, and refusal to be intimidated can level playing fields designed to be uneven. And she proved that one woman's personal victory can become a community's collective empowerment. The applause was genuine, sustained. That evening, I sat on the porch alone, wrapped in Mom's old cardigan that I'd found in a closet. The December air was cold, but not unbearable. The rose bushes were dormant, waiting for spring to bloom again. My phone buzzed. A text from a woman I'd helped 6 months ago. "Won my case today, judge ruled in my favor. Thank you for teaching me I was strong enough." I smiled and texted back, "You were always strong enough. You just needed to believe it." More texts followed. Women sharing victories, asking questions, offering support to each other in the group chat we'd established. A digital community extending the physical space we'd created. Sophie joined me on the porch, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thought you might be cold." "Thanks, sweetheart." We sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge. "Mom, I've been thinking, what you built here, Grace's Place, it's not just about legal help anymore. It's about showing women they matter, that their voices count, that they don't have to accept being erased." That's always what it was about. I know, but I think we can do more. Expand beyond legal issues, mental health resources, financial literacy, job training, build a comprehensive support network. That's ambitious. She grinned. "Learned it from you." On Christmas morning, Frank called. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor." "Merry Christmas, Dad. I wanted to tell you, I've been working on something with my therapist, a full accounting of every dollar I took from you. The repair money you sent that I spent elsewhere. I'm setting up a payment plan. It'll take years to repay, but I want to." "You don't have to." "I do. Not because you asked, because it's right. Because I need to make material restitution, not just emotional apologies." After we hung up, I thought about the journey we'd traveled, from that courthouse confrontation to this tentative rebuilding. It wasn't a Hollywood ending, no sudden transformation, no complete healing, just slow, painful progress toward something that resembled reconciliation. Maybe that was enough. That afternoon, Sophie, Lily, and I had Christmas dinner in Mom's dining room. The table where I'd eaten countless silent meals as a child now hosted laughter, conversation. The family I'd chosen and built. Lily raised her glass. "To Grace, to Eleanor, to all the women who refused to disappear." We drank to that. Later, as I cleaned dishes in Mom's kitchen, I looked out the window at the garden sleeping under winter's grip. Come spring, those roses would bloom again. The cycle continuing, life persisting despite everything designed to suppress it. I thought about all the women who'd walked through Grace's Place doors. The ones who'd won, and the ones who'd lost but fought anyway. The ones who'd discovered strength they didn't know they possessed. And I thought about Mom. About the quiet woman who'd planted roses and written a will, and made absolutely sure her voice would be heard after she was gone. "I hope I got it right," I whispered to the darkening garden. "I hope this is what you wanted." The roses didn't answer, but I felt Mom's presence in the warm kitchen, in the house that was hers and now mine, in the legacy of women refusing to be silent. I'd fought for her voice. I'd fought for my own. And in doing so, I'd created space for hundreds of other voices to rise. That was justice. Not the kind that comes with gavels and courtrooms, though we'd had that too, but the deeper kind. The kind that transforms pain into purpose. The kind that says I existed, I mattered, and I made sure others knew they mattered too. The kind that outlasts buildings and lawsuits and even lifetimes. The kind called legacy.